Next, it can maybe be used to make decisions on whether to continue in the same direction or whether you need to change course. And certainly it may be used as a basis of replication. So you may run a demonstration project or a pilot project in one area, and then the issue is raised about, well, this has worked really well here. Can we roll this out nationwide? And then there are a set of issues that come into play regarding to what extent were the outcomes associated with the specific context in which a pilot was run, or if you do replicate it, are you actually going to replicate it in the same way, using the same mechanisms for achieving those outcomes? So those, in a sense, are the positive reasons for some of the evaluations that we do. But it's also important to recognise sometimes there are other reasons which are less positive. So to make cuts is one area where evaluation can be used. To give you an example, the consultancy I worked for before coming here did a lot of work in the Republic of Ireland, and as many of you may know, the Irish economy had just collapsed 2-3 years ago, and they spent phenomenally on the public sector and on the non-profit sector for several years. Particularly, the area that I was particularly working in was around drug prevention projects, and there are a raft of projects that were established. A couple of years ago, the funding would just ceased, and there had to be a decision made about which projects were maintained and which were cut. And as a result, they had regional task forces that oversaw these projects. These task forces employed evaluators to actually make a decision on which projects to cut and which to keep, which we never took part in because it's just because the difficulties of getting involved in those kinds of projects. But effectively, evaluators were being used to decide on whether people were to keep their jobs, whether projects were to continue, etc., on a very black and white kind of format. Next, to put off making decisions. Sometimes there's the politics there that, well, we can say that we've commissioned an evaluation and that will take a year to deliver, by which time there may be a change in management, there may be a change in government, and then we can review what the findings are down the line. So sometimes it can be a reason just to put things off. And then finally, sometimes things are evaluated simply because the funding agency that is paying for the implementation of a program stipulated that this needs to be evaluated, and you find that actually there's no interest or appetite on the ground for this evaluation. It's just because it needs to be done. So it's just important to recognise that there are a variety of reasons why this kind of work gets done. Actually, it can be quite important to know, or to at least have an inkling of what's behind you doing this work, and hopefully it'll be towards the top end of that list. But it's good to be mindful of whether some of those towards the bottom are also an issue. And just in terms of understanding the reasons why things why projects are evaluated, I just want to give some examples of projects that I've worked on where understanding that the reasoning behind the evaluation is actually quite important. And I've got examples here of where the evaluations have either been too early or they've been too late in the sense of the timing of the findings. So this is a really important issue, actually, to understand how an evaluation dovetails with the implementation process. So the first one, where are we? But 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, the UK government launched a pilot project in 5 sites to introduce a single non-emergency number. So the emergency number in UK is 999. They did a lot of work to introduce a 101 scheme, which was slightly Orwellian to me, which was a bizarre number to pick. But anyway, the background to this was that they wanted to take some of the pressure off 999 calls, off the emergency calls, by diverting those that weren't emergency calls to a non-emergency number. The non-emergency number would then be diverted to either police or local authority, depending on the type of issue. It was particularly targeted at low-level disorder, antisocial behaviour type issues. So if you've got kids outside your house every night kicking a ball up against your side wall, or if you've got somebody who's graffitied something on your fence, then don't call the emergency number, perhaps call this non-emergency number. Now, this was being influenced with undue haste, really, and as evaluators, we were basically given 6 months to produce an evaluation. And we warned them from the outset that probably what you were going to find, which is what had been found from previous research in this area, particularly in the States, was that you had a degree of latent demand. So early on in the life of these schemes, you tend to see a lot of people that wouldn't have called the emergency number start to call the non-emergency number. And lo and behold, that's what we found. We found that within the first 6 months of operation, there was no reduction in the levels of calls to emergency services, but there was a large increase in calls to this new 101 non-emergency number because of this latent demand issue. Now, what we speculated was that if you'd continued that over another year period, you would have expected to see over time the balance change, with perhaps an increase in the non-emergency number, but slowly a reduction in the emergency number as people got used to understanding what number to ring and so on. So that was an example where the findings really came too early. Other aspects of the rollout itself were very positive, but in the end the project got canned because of government cutbacks. Interestingly, the UK, as from last May, had a new government come in. Now, it seems there was no institutional memory about this particular initiative, because just before I came out here, we received another invitation to tender to evaluate their new non-emergency number that they were introducing. So it's quite amazing that, yeah, short memories. Okay, next, there could also be problems where the results you produce are actually too late for the decision-making process. And I'll just give you 2 examples from that. I worked for the last 10 years as a consultant doing consultancy type research. Before that, I was working in government doing criminal justice type evaluations. But one of my first projects that I undertook when I went freelance was an evaluation of the National Criminal Intelligence Service's organised vehicle crime section. I had a background in vehicle crime, and through some previous work I'd done, had links into this particular unit. Now, basically what they were doing was producing intelligence packages for law enforcement agencies around organised vehicle crime. When we looked at it, what we were finding was that they were producing packages and sending them out the door to law enforcement agencies that identified particular organised crime groups tackling that are involved in different aspects of organised vehicle crime. But what we did was we followed the packages out the door and went and visited the law enforcement agencies to find out exactly what they did with these packages when they arrived on their doorstep. And the reality was that nothing was being done with those packages, partly because they were out of date by the time they reached the law enforcement agency itself. Sometimes there was no interest at the local level to actually tackle organised vehicle crime, because if you get dragged into that, it can be very time consuming. The other problem is that they needed a lot of intelligence development on the ground, so it would have taken local areas quite a time to develop these packages. And to us, it looked like there was no way around this in terms of the way that they were operating, in terms of producing these intelligence packages, that from their point of view, they were successful. They had identified the group, and they were being very much output oriented. They had produced intelligence packages. That was their remit as an intelligence service. The fact that nothing happened to those was less their concern from their perspective. We produced a report, and this is kind of was an early lesson for me in terms of getting in early findings as soon as you can, because the report arrived after the government had made a decision to fund this particular unit for another year. Now, in that report, we actually said, we can't see any benefit of this. We actually think you should disband this unit because it's a waste of £1 million a year. The response that we got was, yeah, but we've already funded it. Oh, and actually, we didn't ask you for recommendations. So we're in a situation where we ended up publishing a report that gave findings that showed there was no results, but had our recommendations cut from it. So you had to read between the lines. So a salutary lesson for us. The next one was even earlier when I worked in the Home Office, running a burglary reduction initiative. We established 63 strategic development projects that were designed to look at different types of burglaries in different contexts, using different interventions to try and tackle that particular problem. And we had a 3-year timescale by which to actually run those projects and evaluate those. And as at that point being on the side of tendering most of the research, we tendered out, we got researchers in for 3 years to evaluate these projects, only to find that that was taking far too long for the government, and they actually wanted findings within a year because they wanted to roll out the next set of projects. In the event, there were another 2 rounds of projects that came out before the findings of the Burglary Reduction Initiative strategic development project. So I think the final results were of what was supposed to be the pilot projects were delivered after some of the second round, third round projects actually finished. So that timing was lost in the sense of developing practice and then feeding that into new projects. So it's really important to understand how that timing issue works in projects. Okay. How is it evaluated is the kind of final question we're going to explore. And here, particularly going to focus on outcome evaluation. There's different questions for process issues, for example. But I particularly want to look at how do we know if something has worked, and how do we know if it was our thing that made the difference rather than something else that made the difference in achieving an outcome. Now, how do we know something's made a difference? Sometimes it's really easy to know whether something's worked or not. I don't know if you can see that. I was in at Oxford University about a month ago, and I saw this and had to take a picture of it. I knew it'd come in handy at some point. Clearly, this is an intervention that hasn't worked in terms of stopping people from parking their bikes in a particular location. But in reality, things are often not as clear-cut and easy as that. And there are 2 things I'm just going to really touch on. One is around the notion of the counterfactual, which is what would have happened without the intervention, and then also something about attribution, which is what is it that made the difference. So just a bit about counterfactual. So we're looking at what is it that, how do we know our thing is, has it worked as expected? And it's effectively there are 4 scenarios. You could have a problem that may go down when it's expected to rise. So that's clearly a success. You may have a problem that goes down, but it doesn't go down by as much as expected, and that you could class that as a failure. You may have a problem that rises, but it goes up by less than expected, and that would be a success. And then finally, you may have a problem that rises by more than expected. And the important thing in the counterfactual is actually having some way of knowing, well, what do you expect? What would have happened if you hadn't actually undertaken this particular intervention? So one approach that's often taken, if you like, in a kind of quasi-experimental way, is to have a reference group or reference area or a comparison or control. Usually the sorts of work that we do, we don't generally have controls because we can't control the real world in which we're working, so we generally have comparisons that we try and match and make as near to our target as possible, recognizing that there may well be extraneous variables you're not able to actually take into account. So that comparison or control will generally give you an idea of, well, what would have happened had you not undertaken the intervention that you had. So what the expectation?